Hello, everyone. We just wanted to make sure that we were connected here, so I apologize for the little delay. I'm Mark C. Crowley, and I just want to make sure that everyone's here for Cooking with Tony. Just kidding. So Hay House is a broad audience, and I just wanted to have a little fun as we get started. But first thing I really want to do is just say thank you for joining me. I'm coming to you from my studio in La Jolla, California, where I just see my cat drinking out of the fountain here. And this is where I actually wrote my book the first time and the second time. And this is the very first time that I've ever done a Facebook Live event. And I really just want to start off by saying thank you to all of my friends from Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook for attending today to support me. I got a huge response saying I'll be there, and I was just sort of shocked and grateful all at the same time. But I also want to more specifically say thank you to the Hay House fans who are seeing me or hearing about me for the very first time. If I can make a guess, some of you might be wondering why an author speaking about leadership would be a good fit on the Hay House channel. And for starters, I'll say that I'm actually one of the first authors to be published under Hay House's new business banner. So it's Hay House Publishing Business. And my message and thesis, as you're about to hear, is actually truly aligned to the traditional topics that Hay House is known for. And the truth is that I am really, really grateful to the Hay House audience. 11 years ago, when I first published the original version of this book I'm going to be talking about, I had no platform, no one knew who I was, and I had this thesis about leadership that directly challenged traditional thinking. And with all of that working against me, just a few days after the book came out, I was interviewed on Hay House Radio, and that was a thing at the time, 11 years ago. And the response to my book and message from the Hay House audience was incredible. And it was a really, truly wonderful experience for me, but it was also my first validation that my work would indeed be embraced. And I've remained connected to several of those Hay House listeners who didn't just come along with me on my journey. They've been a huge supporter of mine ever since. So never realizing that I was going to be published again by Hay House, it's just a really great feeling for me to be back with you and to do my first Facebook Live with you. So I would say that I have a lot to share with you today as both an introduction to me and to my book. And the best part of our time together is going to be at the end. I'm not writing off everything I'm going to be speaking about, but nevertheless, I love doing Q&A. And so I'm hoping as you're listening to this and you're thinking about your own life and your own experiences, that you'll say, I have this question I'd like to ask him. And so we'll stay as long as you would like to answer every question you have related to what you're about to hear. So my goal is to pack as much information as I can for about 20 minutes or so before hearing the questions that this work elicits in you. So let's begin. So I said a minute ago, 11 years ago, I wrote a book called Lead from the Heart, Transformational Leadership for the 21st Century. And before I wrote the book, I had spent 25 years as a senior leader, actually a very senior leader in financial services, which is, traditionally known as just dog eat dog world, survival of the fittest. But in that environment and over a long period of time and at different levels and with different experiences of people and different job families, et cetera, I repeatedly proved that deeply caring about, and I'll even say loving people I managed, influenced them to scale mountains for me. Over and over and over throughout my career, I consistently proved this. And I gathered some truly remarkable data and research and packed it into my book that I believe would hold this tremendous influence over workplace managers, especially CEOs, looking at how do they operate and how are they managing their people. Information that would effectively influence them to rethink, reinvent how they manage their employees. The only problem with my assessment at the time was my failure to anticipate how very much people in business would resist the idea of bringing heart into leadership. So when many workplace managers saw my title, they instinctively, repeatedly assumed that I had to be a religious nut, a spiritualist, or someone who just patently didn't get business. And in business, you see that the heart, or just that word, is always conjured up, a sense of woo-woo, soft, sentimental, weak. And not only that, but in our workplaces, if you think back how we've been managing people for over 100 years, we've long believed that work is work is a transactional relationship. You do the job, we pay you. If you don't do a good job, we get rid of you and find somebody else. That's kind of how we've always thought about work. And so that meant that managers needn't and shouldn't know their employees as human beings. Why would I want to get involved in the messiness of that? And a steady diet of fear and intimidation is the best way of driving performance by far. By the way, I'll tell you a quick story. I spoke at one of America's largest insurance companies. And when I got done telling them everything I'm about to tell you, the national sales manager stood up and he said, "I love this. This is fantastic." He goes, "But I got to tell you, if we're at the end of our quarter and we're not hitting our goals, I'm putting the pedal to the metal on fear." And I said, "Why? Like, why would you do that based on everything you heard?" And he goes, "Because fear drives performance." I said, "Well, okay, it does, but it's probably one of the most harmful things you can do." So you can sense the reluctance, let's just say, to accept that what I'm talking about is truth. And so just to punctuate this, our longstanding belief system is that heart in leadership acts like kryptonite. It'll take a manager down. So we want no part of that. So a book called Lead from the Heart is sort of dead on arrival with a lot of people. They don't even want to understand why anybody would call a book like that, Lead from the Heart. So having no platform at all for 11 years ago, I was urged by my speaking agent. She said, "You really need to sort of cultivate and understand, a platform. Like, people need to know you. So you need to start writing. You need to start getting on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn." And I had no real experience in doing that. And by the way, those technologies were emerging at the same time anyway. So I'm coming into this cold, and she's saying, "Hey, I have this person who can help you." So I paid her $10,000 to guide me on what steps I needed to take in order to build the platform. But rather than come back with ideas on how I could gain a presence on Twitter and LinkedIn, etc., when we had our conversation, she instead told me, she goes, "I have a stern warning for you," is basically the way she set this up. And in her exact words, and I'm using her words, so I apologize to anybody who might be offended by this, but this is what she said to me. She said, "I've read your book and I've read your articles, the ones that I had written for Fast Company at the time. And my advice to you is that you're going to fucking fail if you continue to use the expression lead from the heart. Don't ever use it again." She advocated, she said, if you want to use killer engagement, something like that, that's what the world wants. Nobody wants heart in leadership. So of course I asked her, I said, "Well, did you cash the $10,000 check that I gave you?" But what I realized at the moment was, sort of standing outside of myself, was, okay, what is she really trying to tell me? And what she's telling me is that the world is really not, the business world that I was most trying to impact wasn't ready for this message. And the funny thing is that our traditional leadership philosophy was what was truly failing. She couldn't see that. And so in my research, so she's telling me this won't work. And yet already 11 years ago, we knew that the way we were managing people was doing far more harm to people and organizations than good. We just weren't willing to really, truly look at it and say, let's come up with some new solutions. So at the time that I wrote the first book, job satisfaction numbers in America were already absurdly low. Just half of workers in America were effectively happy going to work every day. In fact, there was a study that showed that at the time, this is pre-COVID, that there were more people enjoyed their commutes to and from work than the work that they were actually going to do. But interestingly, just recently, like in the last month, CNBC reported that employee happiness in America has hit an all-time low. And we also knew 11 years ago that employee engagement scores were horrible, not just in America, but all over the world. And now that I've updated the book, guess what? The numbers aren't significantly better 15 years later. And research repeatedly found that pay alone would never again be the top driver of employee engagement, initiative, and loyalty. So we think, oh, this person's a little unhappy. We don't want to lose them, so we're going to give them extra money. That just no longer holds up, and it wasn't holding up 11 years ago. So in other words, nothing about how we had historically sought to motivate human behavior in our workplaces was working. Yet my consultant wanted me to know that not only didn't the business world think it had a leadership problem to solve, she insisted that bringing heart into the picture was only going to make things worse for me. So I'm at this dilemma. I've spent this money. I'm getting some rather unsupportive feedback. But around the same time, I had an opportunity, synchronistically, to meet Dr. Spencer Johnson. Some of you may know him. He's the genius behind The 1 Minute Manager, and which he co-wrote with Ken Blanchard. And he's the genius author behind Who Moved My Cheese, which I think has sold something like 40 or 50 million copies. It's one of the most successful leadership books ever sold or ever written. And so I had an opportunity to meet him at a dinner party. And I was invited specifically so that I would get a chance to meet him. Very graciously, he just came up to me and just said, hey, tell me your leadership thesis. Like, what is it? And so I told him, I said, well, the way we've always managed people in our workplaces is doing more harm than good. And I discovered through my own direct experience of managing people, but also through really phenomenal research that shows that the human heart literally plays an enormous role in influencing human behavior. So I told him that people are not the rational creatures. We aren't, any of us. We're not the rational creatures we've always thought we were. And that feelings and emotions actually drive most of the actions people take every day. So I said, I'm certain that employee engagement is a decision made by our hearts, and that managers who ensure their people experience a high percentage of positive emotions in their workdays, like intentionally, will not only thrive, they'll do superior work. They'll be loyal, they'll be engaged, they'll be everything managers want. So I'm sitting there and he just goes quiet. And he thought about it for a moment and he looked at me and he said, you're going to face a lot of opposition to these ideas, which I already knew. And he said, because they don't just represent major change, which we human beings like to resist. He said, but because they directly challenge common beliefs about management, like our common thinking about management is so deeply ingrained in us that you're trying to overturn a century of beliefs. It's going to take you time. And he said, but I'm going to tell you something. You're going to be successful. In his words, he said, you will inevitably win over people with your thesis because what you're speaking is truth. That just pierced me when he said it and has been sort of true north for me ever since. Because as you can imagine, encouragement like this from somebody like Spencer Johnson wasn't just hugely helpful. It was the message that I needed in the moment to not go into calling my book Killer Engagement and subordinating everything that I believe to be true. Because that woman just believed that the companies that were interested in hiring speakers and consultants were much more interested in killer engagement than they were in bringing heart into leadership. So he helped me remain fully committed to this. And obviously, I'd already done phenomenal research that proved that I was right. And so basically, he just gave me the courage to hang in there and to truly believe in the message that one day we're going to get there. And by the way, I want to make sure that you don't think that this was an abject failure. It certainly wasn't. And we'll talk about some of the successes of it in a second. But it's not as if all of business resisted this and it was like, this is never going to be successful. It's just there was so much resistance throughout business that we have sort of fought this idea, even if we believed conceptually, intellectually, on some level, he's probably right, but we're not going to do it. So it's getting the behaviors to shift that is really what's taken 11 years. So as I mentioned before, I personally manage people very differently throughout my career. And if you read my book, and here's an opportunity for me to plug it. Just kidding. There it is. In the preface of my book, which I'm so hoping you'll read, tell the story of how I came to lead people in ways that were entirely out of sync with what pretty much every manager I ever worked with in my 25 career used or approached leadership with. And it all has to do with a pretty corrupt upbringing. And I won't go into the details of that. What I will say, though, is that by my wiring being changed by my upbringing, I became much more sensitive to the needs of people. And knowing what I would have wanted in any given moment, because I didn't get it growing up, I gave it to people. And under the belief that if I gave it to people, I wonder if they would thrive, because I always felt that I didn't have those things. And had I had them, I would have been infinitely more successful, perhaps when I got out of college, and even more confident when I started my career. It was all buried in this whole lifetime experience, first 18 years of my life. And it influenced me to be thoughtful about people and to really, truly care about them. And so in the process of this, when I was I think I was like 43 years old, a woman came to me and who worked for me for 20 years. And she said, you manage people really, really differently than anybody else. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she started giving me lists of things that I had done over the years. And all of a sudden it just hit me. I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea that my upbringing had influenced me to manage people. It was almost entirely unconscious for a very long time. But what I learned is by caring about their needs, that the epiphany that I had was that what made people perform so wonderfully for me throughout my entire career was that all along I've been affecting the hearts of people. And that's the reason why every team I ever managed excelled. And the funny thing is that once it dawned on me that I had been affecting people at their core, in their heart, I had the immediate concern that people in business, especially people that I once worked with in financial services, my last job was running a couple thousand investment advisors, stockbrokers, mutual fund salesmen, insurance people, those kinds of things. And so I thought, wait a minute, if they hear this book is going to be called Lead from the Heart, and I've been gone for 18 months, 2 years in the time of writing the book to having it being published, that they're going to think, yeah, what happened to him? Like, did he have a religious breakdown? Like, that's insane. Like, we don't bring the heart into leadership. So when I had the epiphany, and I'm sitting right here, I'm looking out this window, and I was affecting the hearts of people. Oh no. And so I realized, like, this is like bad. This isn't good. It should be good, but it's not. So I told my wife, I said, I've just wasted like 10 months of my life preparing to write this book because nobody's going to take this seriously. And so she said, well, gratefully, she said, haven't you already proved it? Like, don't you already know it's true? Like, you had all this experience. So why don't you go looking for like any research? Like, why don't you spend some time in seeing if you can validate it? And that was just profoundly encouraging to me because I found it. So there's a ton of stuff that I found out, some of it relating to the things that I was talking about job satisfaction and employee engagement and those kinds of things, which have been updated and are actually more grim than they were 11 years ago. But I'll leave you to the reading of that. But here's the really cool thing that happened to me. So I reached out to a world-class cardiologist, a cardiosurgeon, if you will, a heart surgeon. And her name is Dr. Mimi Guarneri. And coincidentally, she was recommended by my doctor saying, I think what she's working on, you're working on. And so this wonderful synchronicity, I just wrote her a letter and said, I think I've been affecting the hearts of people. Am I out of my mind, or is there any science that might back this up? And I'm asking you because you are a scientist and you work on hearts and you would probably know. So just a little bit of background on her. She graduated top of her medical school class at one of the state universities in New York. She's the author of 2 books, and you actually might have seen her because she had a PBS special about 1.5 years ago. So as I said, I asked her specifically, could I have been affecting the hearts in people? And so she just invited me to come. She didn't give me any confirmation. So I drove over, walked into her office. She didn't even get out of her chair. She just looked at me and she said, Mr. Crowley, you figured out something we're just discovering in medicine ourselves. At this moment, I can honestly tell you, it's just us here. So I just had tears coming down my eyes because I knew just when she said, you figured out something, I knew she was going to give me some confirmation that would just be life-changing. And it was. So what she said was, for hundreds of years, science, medical science, believed that the heart was just a blood pump and that the brain is where all of our cognitive ability occurs. And in her medical school training, she said, I was taught to treat the heart as a carburetor, like a car part. So imagine if these medical students working on cadavers for the first time, and they're starting to work on hearts, looking at hearts. I'm not sure what they were doing with them, but nevertheless, they're studying the hearts and touching hearts. And apparently some of the medical students were squeamish, like that's the spirit of a human being. Like I'm uncomfortable with this. So the doctors were like, no, treat it like a carburetor, treat it like a car part. There's nothing there. It's a pump. So she said, that's how I was taught. She says, I was taught, don't get caught up in the heart being anything more than a pump. But she said, as I started to become a cardiosurgeon and I started to get to know my patients, like what's going on in your life? Who are you? She said, I'm just not going to go in there and just open them up and see that they need a stent and put the stent in and have no connection with these people. So she said, basically what I did was I started asking them, what do you do? And, tell me about your life. And she said, Mark, everyone with serious heart issues had massive stress in their lives. They were either in bad marriages, bad jobs, had severe financial problems, drank too much, all of those combined. And so she said, this happened over and over and over. And I have this piece of information that says the heart is a carburetor. And then I'm having these people come in and telling me that their biography, what's happening in their life, is affecting their biology. And she said, those two ideas can't stand together. And so she said, whatever they were teaching when I was in medical school, it's not true. Because if their hearts were merely pumps, they would never respond at all negatively or positively to anything. They wouldn't respond negatively to stress, is really her point. So she said, now this was 11 years ago, she said, medical science has come to discover that the heart actually does a lot more than circulate our blood. It actually does a lot of our thinking. And so there is research that shows that the heart has its own mini brain that's independent of our mind, and it has its own logic that greatly affects our reasons and our choices. But it also turns out that the heart, this and this, are connected through what's called the vagus nerve. And the heart and the mind are actually in constant communication, with the heart sending out more information to the brain than vice versa. So the heart is sensing an experience and sending that information to the mind to make heads or tails of what's going on. But they're working together. In the words of world-class neurosurgeon, Stanford Medical School professor, Dr. James Doty, he said to me, now think about this. He's a brain surgeon, one of the world's renowned brain surgeons. And he said, the heart and the mind work together in a unified intelligence. By the way, I will tell you parenthetically that he was a guest on my podcast, Lead from the Heart podcast, and I wrote an article on LinkedIn called Why a World-Class Brain Surgeon Believes the Heart Matters More Than the Brain in Leadership. So you can find those if you're interested in hearing about it, because for whatever reason, I didn't include this in the book. But he basically told me, he goes, no, we realize now that the heart has so much more influence in our choices, in our reasoning, in our behavior. So independent of that actually happened more like 5 or 6 years ago, talking to Dr. Doty. But Dr. Ghaneri, after hearing my thesis and telling me what she had learned, she said, look, you're onto something, and I want to introduce you to an organization that has been studying the intelligence of the heart for the last, at this time, 20 years ago. And it was called the Institute of Heart Math, and I'm guessing some of you are nodding your head that you're familiar with this because this is very much aligned to the Hay House narrative. But its chief scientist, Dr. Roland McCready, has since become a friend of mine. And he told me, because he understood what I was doing with people when I was managing them. And he said, there's a clear reason that people outperformed for you, Mark. In other words, there's a reason, direct scientific reason, that people scaled mountains for you, as you described it. And he said, my inclination to respect people, value them, coach them, make them feel safe, appreciate them, all of those things and more, effectively gave them everything that they needed in order to thrive. So it's interesting because he gave me some information that I'm going to give a validation to in a second. But he was the first person to tell me that when human beings experience a constant flow of positive feelings and emotion, that it actually creates a harmony in our nervous systems. He calls it coherence. So the communication that's going back and forth between the heart and the brain, when that occurs, when we have this harmony, when our bodies are experiencing positive feelings, emotions, people enter what he calls an optimal state of performance. So he said, you didn't know what you were doing. He didn't mean it critically. He just said, you didn't realize that by caring so much about people and being thoughtful about it, that you were creating an environment for them to perform optimally. So that means that the heart is the primary driver of optimal performance. When you make people feel valued, when you make them feel appreciated, and this has to be intentional, it has to be authentic. When you make them feel cared for and supported, all of that naturally inspires their highest level engagement. That's what human beings need in order to thrive. So it's interesting because very recently, so I paid a lot of dues. The woman that I paid the $10,000 to, she said, if you're going to continue to go forward and ride this thing out, you're going to take a lot of punches in the stomach to get people to really believe what you're saying is true. So I think people are beginning to say this because you're hearing now heart-led leadership or heart leadership. All of a sudden, that expression is much more prevalent than it was even 2 years ago. But the thing I want to make sure everybody understands is that I'm speaking of this as a literal truth. I don't mean it as a metaphor. So when other people are saying, well, heart-led leadership, I think they really mean it symbolically, metaphorically, but I'm not. I'm saying that's why there's a heart on the cover. There's a intentional anatomical heart, because it has to do with the literal organ in our bodies that we once thought was just a pump, and now we're discovering has a great influence over us. So when I say lead from the heart, I'm not embarrassed to say that to a workplace manager. One, because I've been one myself and proved that this works, but the other because I have all the research behind me to prove that I'm right. So once I fully realized that this woman was right, that the world wasn't truly fully ready for lead from the heart, or the heart, we'll go there, I realized, okay, this is going to be a time-consuming affair. So am I going to be the killer engagement guy, or am I going to hold on to my guns and ride this thing out? Now, truth is, if somebody said it's probably going to take you a decade before the world really truly understands what you're talking about and accepts it as truth, who knows whether I would have continued. But what I will tell you is that I did start off with a deliberate plan. I started writing articles in Fast Company magazine, because it has a big business audience and it also has sort of an enlightened audience. So I wanted to go to the people who were most ripe for this. And then I started writing for LinkedIn, and all of this with a goal of dripping my ideas over time. So you read one, you go, it's nothing that I thought he was, and over, right? And I figured that they'd come to see over time that my thinking wasn't crazy overall. That was my plan. So then I thought, okay, well, maybe it would help if they could hear me. So you read an article and you go, he's not a nut, but he still has that ridiculous book title, so he's probably still a nut. So I thought, okay, I'm going to launch a podcast. So I launched about 4 years ago the Lead from the Heart podcast so that people could directly hear me and deduce that I wasn't insane after all. Now, I'll leave that to you, but after all this is over, you can decide. But my hope was that if people heard me on my podcast, that they would go, wow, like he's actually making sense. And today it has an audience in 157 countries. But when I started, it was my goal to introduce has a specific goal. And I've disappointed a lot of people who've wanted to come on it because their work isn't perfectly aligned. Every guest that I've had on, almost 100 people so far, the common denominator is that they were world-class thinkers whose work in some meaningful way validated that caring deeply about the growth, happiness, well-being, and overall thriving of people would lead to everything managers want: loyalty, productivity, performance, all of it, engagement. And so surprisingly, and I think I was surprised after a little while, that the people I ended up finding were coming from places like Harvard and Stanford and London School of Business and Google, those kinds of, remarkable organizations. And so what I learned in the process of putting the podcast together was that consciousness in the world and in our business schools was greatly shifted. I mean, Wharton, as an example of a business school, they basically just taught people how to manipulate an income statement and, to get into arcane finance. So you could leverage buyouts. You're not thinking about how do we manage human beings. They weren't even interested in that, but now they are. And the people that are teaching there are some of the most remarkable people I've ever met. But that wasn't the orientation, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, most specifically. So what I learned in the past decade blows the roof off traditional leadership theory, which, by the way, is, in a nutshell, pay people as little as possible and squeeze as much out of them as possible. We're going to treat these people like robots. We're going to get rid of them when they wear down. We are going to get rid of them when our company is struggling. We don't really care about them. That's traditional leadership thinking. So the thing I mentioned a little while ago was that while business leaders we'll call them a hard nut to crack, another thing that sustained my spirits through this whole process was the fact that higher education embraced the book from the very beginning, like the beginning. The original Lead from the Heart has been taught in 9 American universities, including a Big Ten MBA program and an educational leadership PhD program. As an aside, I was in the gym one day and the book had just come out, and I was going there on a Saturday. It was like 1:00 in the afternoon. And I ended up getting into this conversation with a guy that was putting a suit and tie on a Saturday afternoon. And I said, "Are you going to work?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to work. I'm a professor and I'm going up to Orange County. I'm in San Diego. It's about 70 miles away, and I'm teaching a class." And I said, "Oh, that's like fantastic. Good for you." And so he goes, "What do you do?" And I just said, "Oh, I just wrote a book and that's what it's about." And we had a nice conversation. And about 3 weeks later, he goes, "Hey, I just want to say goodbye to you. I'm leaving." And I said, "Well, Johnny, we hardly knew you. You didn't tell me you were leaving. Where are you going?" So he moved to Northern Arizona. He had been building a house with his wife in Prescott, Arizona. And without ever telling me, he looked up my book, read the book, and immediately got a job at Northern Arizona University and went into the dean and said, "I'm teaching this book." And it was the very first book. These are the kinds of synchronicities that have happened to me. And so from there, 8 other universities have taught the book, which obviously is hugely encouraging and was hugely encouraging. But as much as I tried to win over workplace leaders over the years, what finally made the idea of leading with greater balance of mind and heart viable in business, I hate to say, was a 2-year-long global pandemic. This is what, I tried writing articles, I tried podcasts, I did, everything on social media, but truly what had the greatest influence, as you can imagine, all around the world was the fact that we were all deployed to our homes. We had plenty of time to start assessing our lives, especially our work lives, and to confirm whether or not we were happy. And guess what? We have the metrics to show. Millions and millions of people are quitting every month and have been for the last 21, 22 months, setting records. And it's because people ask themselves, do I work for a trustworthy and caring boss? Do I have meaningful work that's fulfilling? Do I trust this organization? And so as we've seen, the answers clearly aren't yes. In a lot of cases, people are looking for new places to go, new people to work for, with dreams of working in an environment where they're not treated inhumanely, or where they aren't, that's it. They don't any longer want to be treated as a commodity and treated inhumanely. So I think the conclusion is that people have grown especially weary of working for bosses who ignore their personal challenges, their responsibilities in life, what's going on in their lives, the stresses, and those who fail to define when work hours begin. I'm a big believer in this, that with technology allowing people to work anytime, anywhere, that we've allowed people's personal lives to be eroded by, hey, could you get on a quick call, or, could you send me a response to this email around 7:30 tonight? This is a selfishness that people have grown really weary of. So well-being has suffered a lot for people during COVID, but this was made worse in certain cases where managers just ignored that their people were burning out and needing some accommodations to keep their personal lives on the rails. And people just said, you know what, I don't want to work like this any longer. And even today, like right now, there's a study that shows that 40% of the working population in 31 countries have their heart set on getting a new job. Even with this theoretical recession that's coming, 40% of the working population says, I don't really want to stick around for where I'm at. It's got to be better somewhere else. And so now the signs are profoundly clear that employees have fully rejected the old ways of leadership and are demanding something entirely different. And where we are today is a point where I believe workplace leaders are seeking guidance on how to manage in the post-pandemic world. And guess what? All the ideas I wrote about in 2011 have stood the test of time, and they are what leaders, workplace managers need now in order to succeed, and not only just attracting, but retaining and keeping the spirits alive in the people that they manage. So I want to stop here. I'm excited to hear your questions, but I have one last final really cool piece of information to share with you. This is another one of these life-changing things, and I hope it's life-changing for you as well. I was interviewing Professor Barbara Fredrickson. Some of you may know her. She's a world-class scientist on positive psychology. She's at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I was interviewing her for an article that I was writing. And at the very end, I asked her a question, just came to me, had nothing to do at all with the article. And she said this. She said that she now knows through her work, that human beings are hardwired to thrive on positive emotions. And we actually wither when we don't regularly experience them. So her work proves that our happiness and well-being requires a minimum of 4 positive emotions, the experience of positive emotions for every 1 negative one we experience. And higher ratios, actually, if it's 5-to-1, 6-to-1, 7-to-1, even better for people in order to thrive. But minimally, we need 4. So if people are marinating in negative emotions all day, it's no wonder that they want to get out of there. By the way, there's a researcher at the University of Washington, John Gottman, who proved that marriages survive when the relationship, both parties have 5 positive emotions for every 1 negative one. So confirming. But all of this information led me to create this term emotional currency. So rather than emphasize financial pay, which you have to pay people fairly, you have to pay people generously. But once that's established, what matters more to workers than their paycheck is how their bosses and organizations make them feel every day. So I believe we need to pay people an emotional currency. We need to give them experiences that create the positive emotions. And that's very much in the book. But here's the thing that I wanted to tell you. There's a core list of positive emotions. So when you think about positive emotions, you think of like joy, awe, interest, love, appreciation, those kinds of inspiration. These are positive emotions. But what Barbara Fredrickson's research has additionally shown is that anytime we experience a positive emotion as a human being, what we're really experiencing is love. So joy is an experience of love. Awe is an experience of love. Interest is an experience of love. Appreciation is an experience of love. I know this is where people can go, oh man, now he's going woo-woo on me. And I hope you can tell that in my life, I've managed people very successfully. And business, you have to drive performance. So everything I'm talking about is a balance between mind and heart. It's not all heart. It's not all caring. You have to do both. What's missing in business is the caring. And if you don't have the caring, then just demanding that people perform for you, that's not going to work. And yet we continue to think it will. So what she said to me was, She goes, you don't have to go up to people and go, I love you, come here, let me give you a big hug, you're the best, I love you. That's not what we're talking about. What she's saying from an academic point of view is if you just appreciate people, if you show interest in them, if you grow them, if you read something on the weekend and say, hey, Tom, I just sent this article over to you because you were just telling me about this and I think you'd be interested in it. Like, Mark thinks about me after work. Like, how cool is that? That creates a positive emotion. That's love. So it just simply means that by being sensitive to how people feel in any given moment, you as a manager, and truthfully, even if you're not a manager, if you're a co-worker and you use this information, you can have a profound influence in their lives and in their behavior. So going forward, leaders must appeal to their hearts and people, not just their minds. It's got to be both. In complete truth, my new addition is, I hope you can tell this, is my life's work and purpose. I truly believe I was put on the planet to do this work. And as you'll read, all of my life's experiences inform this book, but it's also filled with many new studies and stories that didn't exist a decade ago that make the thesis completely irrefutable. So I'll say to my Hay House friends that this is inherently, and all friends, truthfully, they know this, it's an inherently spiritual book when you consider we're really talking about supports or harms the human spirit. But it's also backed up by profound science, which proves irrefutably that human beings are motivated by feelings and emotions, not appeals to our minds. So I'm certain that this time, leading from the heart and with the heart is the future of workplace leadership. And I thoroughly explain why and then how in the book. And coincidentally, the book was just published yesterday. And my hope is that you'll pick up a copy for yourself and maybe even copies for your team. And I'm going to stop there and say thank you very, very much. So we're going to go to Sabrina, and she's going to read off some questions. I hope. We're not picking up Sabrina here, and I want to, I'm just looking at the comments here, and boy, we have an audience all over the world, which is just amazing. Jennifer Hitchcock, is your book available on Audible? I was resistant to doing this for a long time, but my publisher, Hay House, actually required it. So yes, it went live yesterday. So I'm open to any questions. These are lovely, lovely comments that you are sharing, but do you have any questions that you would like to ask? We can end it here, but we can keep going if you have questions. I'm not seeing any questions at all. So either I did a really thorough job or you guys are just being really shy. And we never got back with Sabrina. So I guess I'm going to wait another 30 seconds just to see if anyone has any questions about this whatsoever. And by the way, this can relate, if you'd like to I have a team with such and such of a problem, and how would you approach it? I'm happy to answer those questions. So we'll give this just another couple minutes, actually 30 seconds, just to see if anybody has a question to type in. And otherwise, I'll say goodbye. Thank you, Jennifer Hitchcock. So the question is, how does this work relate specifically for younger folks? So here's the interesting thing. We've got a lot of generations in the workplace, but principally now it's the baby boomers who some are moving into retirement. Some, by the way, were living much longer than we've ever lived. And so I know some of the younger generations are saying, off you go. I want an opportunity for a promotion here, but you're sticking around and you're 67 years old. But I think we have to get used to that. And there's actually great value in having the wisdom of somebody that's worked in anywhere for that long to help influence. So I would encourage organizations to do a better job of, integrating all age groups. But the question really is, how does this relate to managing Gen Z, which is just coming into the workplace, and then, of course, millennials? And this is another one of these wonderful synchronicities, but I've developed a personal friendship and relationship with Dr. Jim Harder, who's the head of research at Gallup. And he created their well-being study many years ago. He created their engagement study 25, 30 years ago. And so he and I have written several articles together, and he consulted with me for this book. And what we've found, what the research basically shows, is that while there are differences between Gen Z and the millennials, they're not so significant that they would alter how we manage, except that both of those generations want to be managed the way we're talking about right now, not the way that they've been managed in the past. So when I've said this in the past, people of the baby boomer generation and Gen X would come and say, well, wait a minute, like I want to be managed that way. And of course they do. The difference is that I will tell you that I suffered through a lot of crap in my career in just bad management, bad politics, and bad treatment, because I think I was taught to just accept that work sucks, so that's the way it's going to go. And so the millennials were the first ones to come in and say, we're not going to live like this. We don't want to continue your ways. And the baby boomers basically said, these millennials, they don't get it. They're lazy. Now they're saying the same thing about Gen Z with this quiet quitting kind of a thing. And it's just, the truth is, it's just not true. What they're looking for is a balance between working hard and contributing and growing and doing good work, but also having a life. And so we can either resist that or we can align to it. And if we align to it, what I found is that when you say, hey, I don't expect you to work, when you leave here, whatever that is, 5:30, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, when you go home, I'm not expecting you to do any additional work. I'm not expecting you to be on email all night. Now, if they choose to, that's their choice. And if they choose to, that's a demonstration of initiative. It's not that I have to comply by responding to emails at 7:30 because my boss will fire me if I don't. There's a very big difference in this. So the answer to your question is really Gen Z and millennials are the ones that are forcing the change, because they're the first generations to say what you've accepted in terms of a work life is nothing that I want to accept. And I'm going to keep looking for a new job until I find an organization that's going to care about me, authentically care about me, not the team, not the company, me. And so if you have a manager that buys into that and says, I'm going to basically support anybody who works for me and be their advocate and be their coach and look out for them, well, that's going to be the marriage made in heaven. So Gen Z is really pushing the needle here. I mean, they're really pushing hard on, they're basically saying, unless I get a workplace that's going to support me as a person, I'm not going to work here. Millennials, pretty much the same thing. And I think that's what's really forcing this. I used to think, by the way, before I get to the next question, I thought when the book came out originally, CEOs reading this, they're going to see the science and they're going, oh my God, like we've been managing people all wrong. Like, why would you treat people badly when you know that that's misaligned to what makes them optimally perform? So we need to change. Never happened. Never happened. CEOs simply just didn't do that. Then I realized the way this change is going to happen is bottom up. And that's what the Great Recession is all about. People are quitting jobs and companies are like, what are they quitting for? Well, let's give them more pay. Anything but change how we manage. But now when you've got 30, 40, 50 million people quitting jobs and companies are having a struggle to find good people, now they're saying, wait a minute, we have to fix this and we have to approach this. And so I say, thank you, Gen Z, thank you, millennials, even thank you, Gen X, because these are the people that are really forcing it. So, I see. I'm not a manager. Would it still work? Yeah. I mean, all of this works just in terms of your personal relationships. If you can if you can create an experience with people where they feel like you're somebody that is wonderful to be around, you're going to have greater influence. You're going to have greater joy in your work because the relationships with people are really good. Adam Grant wrote a phenomenal book called Give and Take, where he says that if you are generous with people, that those people are infinitely more successful. And in work, we think, oh no, I got to hoard my ideas. I got to hoard what I'm doing. I don't have time to help other people because it's dog eat dog. And that doesn't align to what I know to be true. You will succeed more by caring about other people, whether you're a manager or not. I'm an employer that has 20-year-olds who want to make their own work schedule and has been challenging. I'm in my 40s and seems so different for a work ethic. I think it's a dialogue. I think bringing people in and having them help you. So they say to you, I want to work my own schedule. And so you go home and you try to figure out how to make that work. And then you realize, well, wait a minute, we always have a 9 o'clock meeting and Tom doesn't want to be here until 10. And so how is Tom going to be in the meeting until all this complication? So what I would say is bring them in together and say, look, I want to help to the extent that we can create an environment where you can work a schedule that works for you. I'm happy with that. But there are other times where we need to be together and you have to be flexible too. So if we can find a way to make it so that I'm flexible and you're flexible, this is going to work. So if somebody says, no, I'm only working, I get in around, 10:30, 11, I'm going home at 4, and that just doesn't work for you. You have to be able to say that. But I also think allow yourself just a little bit of discomfort and experiment. So tell them, okay, let's try it. Let's see how this goes. Let's give it 2 weeks. Let's just see how it works. And if everybody is doing their job and we keep everything going and everybody's working their own schedule, then we'll keep it going. And if not, we'll have to make some changes. So it doesn't have to be so binary, their way or your way. Give yourself some opportunities to just say, let's just try it. Or, if you want, you can even experiment with 5 people. Like if you have a team of 30, let's just do a little pilot and see how these people work and then learn from there. But if you're bringing everybody in together, they're part of it. As opposed to, okay, this is what I figured out when I went home last night. It's just, there's something about being a participant in this that makes it kind of cool. I have a small business. There are 2 of us, my boyfriend and I. Occupation is his passion, yet he's a procrastinator and has no interest in money. I'm the financial backer, and I can't get him to understand that I need him to work more so I can cover the financial responsibilities. Eek! How can I motivate him more? I work through my heart and am very patient. In the past, in management positions, I was critical and judgmental. I wanted everything perfect. So I have a lot of those same inclinations, interestingly. If you ask people, how would you describe Mark Crowley? Like you worked for Mark Crowley for a long time. He's the heart guy, right? That's the word you use. And they go, no, he's like the most demanding guy I ever worked for. And I always believe that when you support people this way, people were so significantly better supported by what I was doing for them. And I was like, why do we want to be average? Why do we want to be mediocre? Why do we want to just let's do something great. So all of our teams excelled because they were getting the joy out of it and they were also getting rewarded for it. So it wasn't just like make the manager look better. So in terms of, I think the thing is that too much heart in this situation and too much brashness isn't going to work. But I'll use the literal expression, have a heart to heart with them and say, I want to back you because I believe in this initiative, but I need as a backer, separate from our personal relationship, as a financial backer, I need to know that we're together working really hard to meet our goals. And in all honesty, I feel sometimes that you put off some of the work that needs to be done with greater urgency and that you don't necessarily respect that I'm putting the money into this to help this business thrive. So we need to sort of see our relationship as partners, but also business partners. And the business partner is asking if you can sort of step up in terms of what I'm hoping you'll be able to do in running this business so that this part of our relationship can thrive the same way that our personal relationship can thrive. I hope that's helpful. Mindy, the question is, the conversation is mostly focused on schedule. What about tasks? So I'm going to come back to that. If you can give me some greater detail on what you're asking. Elizabeth Gonzalez, how do you get leaders to lead with their heart if they lead with ego and stubbornness and have influences telling them to lead with the bottom line, not trust the staff they inherited? You know, I guess you have to ask them, how's that working for you? Like, everything that you've described here in terms of their behavior, there's got to be a trail. How happy are the people working for them? What's the turnover? I've always believed, to be honest with you, that HRs, if they did one thing, I have a list of things, but if they did one thing to really truly improve the performance of their managers, they would institute a quarterly question to every employee saying, would you recommend, I'm the manager, would you recommend your boss, Mark Crowley, to other employees in this organization? And you could do it on an A to F scale, 1 to 10 scale, yes or no scale, whatever. And just look to see whether or not you have people that are just getting Fs across the board in terms of people believing that this is the right person to be leading a team. So I would say, I mean, and I don't know what your role is, but to the extent that, first of all, their way of managing isn't succeeding any longer. So if you have any evidence that there's a lot of turnover on those teams, you can point to that. People don't leave companies. We think the culture of a company is what the values are, but really it's what the manager's values are. It's really what the manager's behaviors are. So if you have any evidence that people are leaving that team, you can say, hey, look, it's not working. But, you know, and this is self-promotional, and I don't mean it this way, but what people have done in the past is to say, read this, and then let's have a conversation. Because I think we manage out of fear because we don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe that we have the power to influence people in the way that we need them to. And so when we're falling behind on a goal, or we're not hitting a target, or our boss is on us to get something done, then we go, we got to go into fear. We've got to go into intimidation, and you've got to make people feel uncomfortable. And that's just simply not true. So sometimes people just believe that that's the only tool that they have, and they don't have the education, they don't have the knowledge. So sharing this knowledge with them is probably the first step to getting them to say, oh, like, wait a minute, because it truly adds up that what we're doing and the way that that person is managing, just it's no longer sustainable. It's what people are running from. So if you want to have a career, you know, I'd love to hear that you're like the HR director or a senior manager where you can have the direct communication and just say, you know, if you continue to manage this way, tied to an ancient formula that we now know isn't working. There's no evidence that it's working. I mean, even if you're hitting your numbers or where you're hitting your goals, there's so much wreckage on the side of the road that shows that the journey wasn't a good one, that you're not going to be a manager. That one day the company's going to wake up and say, you know, we can't have you be a manager of people. You just do too much harm. That's my best advice. Let's see if that question came back. Mindy did not come back. I don't see any more questions, and we're coming up on the hour. If there's anybody that has a question that I'm not reading, if you want to just type it in real fast, I'm happy to answer it. I hope this has been helpful. I'm just looking and I don't see any more questions. So what if you have a young manager that just works like a machine and has no work-life balance? So I'm assuming that you're working for that person. I think, you know, in my career, I was always intimidated by people like that. I've always been a very hardworking person. So I actually was probably more guilty of being that manager than being the recipient of a manager that just would never stop. But I think you have to say directly. Sometimes you just need direct communication. You know, boss, I admire you for how hard you work. And it seems sometimes that you work all the time. But I hope that we can have an agreement that that standard that you hold for yourself is a higher standard than at least I can live to. Like, I have things in my life that I need to do beyond work. And so I would like to establish some boundaries with you so that you're not expecting that I would, if you were working at 8 o'clock at night and you're like, oh, what would Mark think about this? That you're not sending me an email and saying, hey, Mark, could you give me your thoughts on this at 8 o'clock at night? So it might take some negotiation is really what I'm saying, because this is somebody that wants to get ahead. But I had a woman that worked for me once, and I had an office that was 70 miles away, but every Friday I worked in San Diego, and she was there, but she worked for me. And so when I was there, I was always working late. And it was way, way too late for me to realize that she saw me in my office and she was uncomfortable leaving. So she'd stay there till 7 o'clock and then finally go, well, I gotta go. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm just thinking she was working on something that was important for her. And it was way too late for me to realize that, wait a minute, I'm creating a standard. I'm creating an expectation that she doesn't want to not be seen as somebody that's a slacker. So I just think it's having a conversation with the manager and saying, are you okay if from this time to this time every day that, I'm with my family doing what I'm doing, and that you're not expecting me to be on the same schedule? That would be the most effective way. And by the way, if they say no, then you've got a bigger problem. But I think sometimes it's just the manager is clueless, like I was. I didn't realize it. But if you say, hey, you're setting a standard here that I can't live to, that's really honest. And I'm working hard. I'm going to do great work for you, but I just need to know that once I get home, I'm home. Are you okay with that? If you get their permission, you've just established boundaries, which I think everybody needs. So we've hit the hour. We've exceeded the hour. I just want to say thank you very much for all of you for coming all over the world. What an incredible honor this has been to see where everybody is. And I'm just going to hold this up. This is the book, Lead from the Heart. You can see my name, Mark C. Crowley, and it's available now. I hope you guys will pick it up. It would mean the world to me. But even if you don't, I hope you'll take this information and use it and prove it to yourself that it works. So thank you so very, very much, everyone. Really, really, really grateful to you.